They call San Francisco a city of dreamers, but I didn't get here on dreams. I got here by grinding. While most guys in their 20s were still figuring out how to pay rent, I was pulling 16-hour days building a consulting firm from a one-bedroom apartment, chasing contracts other people said were impossible. 10 years later, I've got more money sitting in silent accounts than I ever thought I'd see in a lifetime. A man could buy a penthouse, a fleet of sports cars, maybe even his own damn yacht with what I've got. But I still drive my father's old Ford pickup. The paint's faded, the transmission groans, but it's mine. I live in a 3-bedroom house out in Daly City, modest by Bay Area standards. The neighbors think I'm middle class, just another guy mowing his lawn on Saturday. That's how I like it. My mother raised me in Boise, and she drilled one thing into me: humility isn't weakness. Flash fades. The character doesn't. She worked herself ragged to keep food on the table after Dad left, and she never complained once. If she could survive that without whining, then I sure as hell can keep my ego in check, even with 7 figures resting quietly in the bank. Kimberly doesn't see it that way. My wife, 32, sharp dresser, sharper tongue, has always had eyes that linger too long on other people's lives. Designer purses, rooftop parties, cars that look like they belong in Monaco instead of San Francisco traffic. She loves me, or at least I think she does, but sometimes love isn't enough to silence envy. It was written all over her face the night we sat down for dinner at the Andersons' place. David Anderson is a venture capitalist with the kind of swagger that makes other men want to punch him and women lean closer. His wife, Laura, used to work in fashion PR. Now she spends her days hosting charity brunches and posting filtered pictures of herself at Napa Vineyards. Their home is a monument to overindulgence: glass walls, imported stone countertops, an infinity pool spilling into a view of the Golden Gate. We sat at their dinner table, me in my off-the-rack button-down, Kim in a dress she bought on credit. I kept my shoulders square, posture steady, eating steak flown in from God knows where. Kim sipped her wine, laughing too loud at David's stories about his latest deal. I didn't say much, just listened. I found men like him talk themselves into mistakes if you let them. "Ryan," Laura said at one point, tilting her head with polite curiosity, "Kim tells us you're in tech consulting. That must be decent." Decent. I almost laughed. I just closed a contract worth more than David's last investment. But what good would it do to tell them? My money isn't a weapon I need to brandish. "Yes," I said evenly. "It keeps me busy." Kim's smile tightened. I could feel her disappointment radiating across the table. She wanted me to flex, to brag, to match David's bravado with my own. Instead, I let the silence hang. Later, when the Andersons excused themselves to fetch dessert, Kim leaned close, her whisper sharp as a blade. "You could at least try. They think you're some low-level consultant. Don't you care what people think?" I met her eyes and spoke low, steady. "What people think doesn't pay the bills, Kim. What I've built speaks for itself." She rolled her eyes and leaned back just as David returned with a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my truck. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to. The rest of the night, I watched Kim's envy burn hotter with every toast, every laugh, every subtle flex from David about his car collection or his latest overseas trip. She kept glancing at me, searching for something, some signal that I wanted that world too. But I didn't. I've seen too many men chase shiny things and lose themselves in the process. By the time we drove home, Kim was silent. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's loaded, waiting to detonate. I gripped the wheel of the Ford, the engine humming steady beneath me. I didn't say a word either, because deep down, I knew that night wasn't about the Andersons at all. It was about us, about the gulf widening between what I value and what she craves. Money can buy comfort, can even buy luxury, but it'll never buy character. And sitting in that truck with Kim staring out the window like she was already somewhere else, I realized character was the one thing we were starting to lose. Kim started calling our house cozy, with a tone that meant small. And every time she said it, something cold settled behind my ribs like an old nail you can't quite pull. She'd stand in the kitchen with her arms folded, looking at the laminate like it had insulted her personally, and she would say things about light and space and how our lives felt like they were just getting by. While I stood there with grease on my hands from tightening a belt on the truck and thought about how many men would kill for what we already had. I offered to redo the kitchen myself because a man who can build a business can swing a hammer, and I told her we could knock out the half wall, run gas for a proper range, and replace the counters with something that wouldn't peel, although I had to stop myself from mentioning that I could buy the entire block if I wanted, because that wasn't the point and I wasn't going to turn this into a contest of who could shout their bank balance loudest. She didn't want a wall moved. She wanted a life moved, and it showed up in little ways that started to add up like receipts stuffed in a drawer you never open. Since she began dressing like every day was an interview with someone richer than me, and she'd come home from brunch, smelling like a department store, tired but wired, and I'd ask if she had a good time and she'd say, fine, with a smile that requested a different question. She began marking up magazines with tabs, kitchens shaped like museums, closets that could house a small family, bathrooms with more marble than the courthouse, and she'd drop them on the coffee table like evidence in a case I wasn't allowed to argue. At dinner, she would bring up the Andersons the way some people bring up religion, with conviction and a promise of salvation, and she'd tell me about their wine cellar or their view, and then she would circle back to us with the gentle cruelty of a person convinced that disappointment is honesty, saying our house felt stuck, and our life felt paused, and I should think bigger, as if restraint were a sin and not a principle that built everything I own. I kept my voice level because I've learned something about anger. If you feed it noise, it eats you, but if you feed it purpose, it works for you, and I told her that comfort is paid for twice, once in cash and then again in peace, and I wasn't about to mortgage the second to impress people who don't know our middle names. She called that fear, and she said I was hiding from the life we deserved, and I asked who we was because every time she said the word, it sounded like a shape I didn't fit, and she looked away and said maybe she just needed time to think. And she said it softly but with the finality of a judge, and I could feel the deck shift under my boots like a freighter taking a swell on the beam. I told her she could think all she liked right here at home, because thinking doesn't require a suitcase, and the line lingered between us with the weight of an accusation I hadn't voiced. One night she came in late, shoes in her hand, heels dangling like punctuation, and she smelled like rooftop air and bar lime, and she moved quietly, not guilty quiet but practiced quiet, the kind you learn when you expect to repeat it, and I watched from the dark of the hallway without saying a word because sometimes the truth needs silence to make itself obvious. The next morning she said she was meeting friends to help plan a charity gala, and when I asked which charity, she said it like a punchline I wouldn't get, and I let it go because I don't fight battles in fog and I'd rather choose the ground. I took the truck to the garage and changed the oil even though it didn't need it because turning a wrench keeps the hands busy while the mind arranges its tools, and I thought about Boise and my mother, and how she'd look at me now and measure me not by the truck I drove but by whether I kept my word to myself, and I made a decision that felt like a steel pin sliding into place. I would not flash money to hold a marriage together because if the only glue is gold, then the first hot day melts it, and I would not chase her through rooms where mirrors were the only audience, and I would not beg because a man who begs for respect has already traded it. I would stand, watch, and act when it counted. That evening I cooked not fancy. Cast iron skillet, seared chicken, garlic green beans, bread warmed in the oven, and I set the table like it mattered because it does, and when she came home, I saw that look again, the one that scanned the room for a better room, and I pulled out her chair and poured her water and waited until the clink of silverware settled. I told her I loved her, not as an alibi but as a fact, and I said I wasn't changing the way I lived to match someone else's highlight reel, and if she wanted a bigger life, we could build it the old-fashioned way, brick by brick with our names on the mortar, but I wouldn't lease a personality to impress people I don't respect. She said I made everything a moral lesson, and she was tired of sermons from a man who hides behind humility to avoid ambition. And her voice didn't climb, but it cut clean. I felt the heat rise in my chest, the kind that makes a younger man break dishes just to hear them answer back, and I held it like a live wire in a gloved hand, and I said this isn't about ambition, this is about appetite, and I won't feed one that never learns to be full, and if she wanted time to think, I'd give her all the silence she needed, but I wouldn't be a stage for a performance of dissatisfaction. She stared at me long enough to decide which version of me she believed, and then she pushed her plate back and said the line she'd been polishing in her head for weeks, that maybe some space would be good, and maybe a weekend away would clear the fog, and she said it with the smile people use when they negotiate a raise. I nodded once, slowly, because permission wasn't the conversation so much as acknowledgement, and I told her to take whatever time she needed, since time has a way of revealing what speeches hide, and she looked surprised that I didn't argue, which told me more than her words ever could. After she went upstairs, I cleaned the kitchen like I always do because order is a habit, and then I sat at the small desk by the window and opened the ledger I keep in my head and my hard drive, the one that doesn't just track money but measures cost, and I wrote a line only I would read. If she leaves to think, she will return to decide, and I will be ready either way. When the house went quiet, I walked the rooms like a guard on rounds, not paranoid but vigilant, and I stood at the bedroom door and watched her sleep with the practiced innocence of the unexamined. And I felt that old nail in my ribs again, and I decided to stop trying to pull it, because some metal reminds you what you're made of, and it keeps you upright when the weather turns. In the morning, she packed a tote bag that wasn't a suitcase and told me it was for a yoga retreat with her friends, and I kissed her cheek and said have a good weekend, and the calm in my voice wasn't for her. It was for me, because a steady hand keeps the cut straight when the blade finally comes down. She came home on a Thursday evening, suitcase in hand, the wheels of it clattering against the steps like a drum roll for a verdict I already knew was coming. I was at the kitchen table, bills spread out, though most of them were already auto-paid with the quiet precision I preferred. When I looked up, I didn't see a woman returning from yoga or brunch or whatever excuse she'd been leaning on. I saw someone rehearsing. Kim set the suitcase upright by the wall and smoothed her dress like she was preparing for a performance. Her face was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that only comes after someone has convinced themselves the selfish thing is the righteous thing. I didn't say a word. I let her start because men who speak first in these moments usually end up talking over the truth. "Ryan," she said, voice soft but steady, "we need to talk." I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and nodded once. "Then talk." She took a breath, the kind you take before a plunge. "I love you, but not enough. I can't keep pretending I'm happy in this life. I want more than this house, more than this existence. I need excitement, ambition, luxury." The words came rehearsed, polished. I could tell she'd recited them somewhere. Maybe in front of a mirror, maybe in someone else's bed. My jaw tightened, but my hands stayed steady on the table. Anger is a weapon, and weapons should never be fired in panic. "You've had all of that," I said quietly. "You just never saw it, because you were too busy looking at someone else's plate." Her lips pressed into a line. "You hide behind humility like it's virtue, but it's just fear. You could have more. We could have more. But you choose less. And I can't live small anymore." That was the line. The dagger wasn't that she was leaving. It was that word, small. Small, from the woman who never lifted a hand to build what she enjoyed, calling the life I bled for inadequate because it didn't glitter enough for her taste. I could have told her the truth right then, that the man she thought lacked ambition had more money at his fingertips than the Andersons would ever see. I could have pulled bank statements, contracts, balance sheets, and stacked them like bricks in front of her until her greed drowned under the weight of what she threw away. But I didn't, because she didn't leave for lack of money. She left for lack of character, and money can't fix that. "So where does this leave us?" I asked, my voice even, my stare locked on hers. She shifted, looked at the floor, then back at me. "Divorce. I think it's for the best. I'll get a place, figure things out. I still care about you, Ryan. I always will. But I want a different life." Her suitcase by the wall said she wasn't just testing the words. She'd already chosen. I stood, slow and deliberate, and walked over to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the rooftops, throwing gold across the modest yards of our street. I thought of Boise, of my mother's tired hands, of everything I'd built by refusing shortcuts. And then I thought of the woman behind me, ready to trade it all for a shinier cage. "Then we'll do it," I said finally. "Divorce. Clean. Quiet. You'll get your freedom." I didn't turn to see her reaction, but I heard the soft exhale of relief, as if she expected a scene. Begging. Rage. Some display of weakness she could use to justify her choice. She got none of it. Inside me, though, the storm began. Controlled, yes, but violent in its silence. Not at her leaving, that was just the match. The fire came from the knowledge that she thought she knew me, thought she could measure my worth by the absence of marble countertops and flashy cars. She had no idea. When she finally rolled her suitcase toward the door, she paused and looked back. You'll be okay, Ryan. You always are. I met her eyes for the last time as her husband and said, I was okay before you, Kim. I'll be okay after. The door shut with a soft click, and the house went still. I sat back at the kitchen table, gathered the bills into a neat stack, and pushed them aside. My pulse was steady, my breath measured. Grief wanted a seat at the table, but I didn't set a place for it. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up accounts she didn't know existed, and began reviewing numbers with the precision of a man drawing blueprints. Love may have left the house tonight, but strategy just moved in. Carla didn't waste words. That's why I liked her. We met at a diner off El Camino, a place where the coffee is burnt on purpose and the waitresses call you Han. She slid into the booth across from me with a legal pad and a pen that clicked like a metronome. 2 rules, she said, not bothering with hello. Don't posture. Don't provoke. We make this fast, clean, and boring. The minute it gets loud, it gets expensive. I can do boring things. She studied my face. You look calm. Don't confuse that with being fine. I'm not fine, I said. I'm focused. She nodded once. Good. Focus wins. We went through the balance sheet, at least the version Kim knew. The house, the joint accounts, the Tacoma title in her name, the retirement fund she'd half filled and half forgotten, my salary which I'd kept modest by design. I let Carla skim the rest without touching the real engine room, holding companies, legacy vehicles, retained IP, and the operating agreements that predated the wedding by a clean 2 years. Carla didn't need the full blueprint to build the wall. She only needed the bricks Kim might try to grab. She's not a fighter, Carla said, flipping to a fresh page. She's a shopper. She'll trade discovery for a quick date in front of a judge if the settlement looks glossy. You offer certainty. She'll reach for it. What do I put in the window? House equity, her car free and clear, a lump sum to reset. You keep the company. She keeps the narrative in her friend group that she walked away with her chin up. Pack it with dignity and she'll never open the box. I watched a bus rumble past the window. The sun was just rising. Men in reflective vests were already on the sidewalk, coffee steaming in paper cups, boots loud on concrete. Working men don't fear early mornings. They fear wasted effort. Write it, I said. Short, clear. The next week was a conveyor belt. Papers slid. Signatures landed where they needed to. Kim's attorney, palm-tanned, smiley, the kind of guy who says "my friend" to strangers, pushed for numbers that sounded big in a group chat. Carla countered with numbers that ended the conversation. We offered the house in her name, the joint savings, her car, and a lump sum that looked generous to anyone who didn't understand compounding. The business stayed mine without prejudice. The phrase folded in like a steel rod through concrete. Kim kept her voice sugar smooth in mediation, playing gracious for the room. She'd show up in new shoes, approval stamped on the sole, like she was rehearsing for a better life with someone else. I didn't ask who. I already knew there was a who. Her eyes had switched pronouns weeks ago. On the day we finalized draft terms, I left early and walked 2 blocks to a cafe to clear my head. The place was small, with a tile floor, 2 doors, and a patio fenced with rosemary. I was halfway through a black coffee when laughter hit the air like a dropped glass. Kim's laughter. Not the laugh she used with me. The real one, from the ribs, the one that made waiters turn their heads, came from the patio. I didn't go to the fence like a jealous kid at a ballpark. I sat still, turned my chair a 1/4 inch, and let the glass of the door throw me their reflection. Kim, her friend Madison, sharp Bob, sharper opinion, and a man I recognized from headlines without needing his name. Nate Cole, real estate investor, good suit, loud watch, teeth that sold futures. He moved like a guy who'd run up every tab in town and never been asked for a card. I heard Madison first. Kim, I'm telling you, Nate isn't like these tech boys who squirrel money under mattresses and call it humility. He plays big. Nate chuckled. Don't be cruel. Humility's a virtue. In church. Kim laughed into her palm. Ryan's not broke. He just thinks Flash is vulgar. Vulgar, Nate repeated, testing the word like a wine note. No, darling. Poverty is vulgar. Wealth is generous. Is it? Kim said softly. Madison leaned in. Anyway, paperwork is almost done. She'll be free. Clean. Fresh start. Nate's reflection tilted toward Kim, a measured, predatory angle. Then let's get you a view. I didn't turn. I didn't breathe any louder than I already was. I took one slow sip and put the cup down on its saucer without a sound. People show you who they are when they think you're furniture. I listened long enough to learn the one thing I needed. Not that he wanted her. That he wanted an audience. Men like Nate aren't building houses. They're building mirrors. They left before I did. I waited 10 minutes, paid cash, and took a walk that wasn't about steps so much as angles. If you want to fell a tree, you don't hack blindly. You study the grain. That night, I pulled records. The county assessor's office, Secretary of State, scanned filings at midnight while the neighborhood slept. You can find most men in public if you know where to look. Nate's business was a hydra of LLCs, cross-collateralized loans, a tangle of mezz debt dressed up as growth capital. He moved fast and funded faster, inventory cycling through staging companies that all billed within the same 30-day window. Leverage wore cologne. Risk lived in the footnotes. I found the lifelines, the hard money lender that refinanced his flips when the clock ran long, the private credit fund that took second position for a premium, the broker who greased city permits with promises of activating blight. He wasn't liquid, he was loud. The louder the man, the tighter the margin. Carla called the next morning. Are you ready for signatures? I am. Anything I should know? Yeah, I said. Eyes on a UCC filing that told a fuller story than any Instagram feed ever could. She's stepping from a boat into a mirage. Make sure she does it quickly. At the courthouse, we sat 6 feet apart and performed in the small theater that ends marriages. The judge was efficient and bored, which suited me fine. Kim wore white like a dare. I wore navy because ink looks better on sober colors. When the judge asked if we both understood and agreed, I said, "Yes, Your Honor," in a tone that could have sealed a business deal or buried a secret. Kim said yes with a tremor that she disguised as relief. Her attorney squeezed her elbow and called her champ. We stepped into the hallway. Papers warm from a stamp that means the state has witnessed your end. Kim looked at me as if expecting a speech, a memory, a last-ditch plea from a man too proud to admit he's scared. She got none of it. "Goodbye, Ryan," she said, poised like a magazine ad. "Good luck, Kim." Carla and I walked out into the pale noon. On the steps, men in work boots and men in suits shared the same sun. Carla slid her sunglasses on and angled her chin toward me. "You kept your hands steady. Steady wins," I said. "You know she's going to figure it out," Carla added lightly. "About you, the money, the press will get around to you again. You never stay invisible. She'll hear it from someone else," I said. "And she'll have to live with the fact that I never used it to buy her back." Carla's mouth curved at the corner. "That's the one thing money can't do." We shook hands. She headed left. I headed right. That evening, I returned to the house that wasn't mine anymore and handed Kim the keys like I was passing a baton I'd chosen not to run with. She did a final walkthrough, touching walls like a real estate agent. I stood on the porch and looked at the streetlights coming on. One by one, steady as a pulse. Madison's car pulled up to the curb. She waved at me like we were neighbors and I was late for trash day. Nate wasn't with her. Not yet. Men like him don't arrive for moving boxes. They arrive for ribbon cuttings. Kim took the keys, fingers lingering in my palm a second longer than necessary. "You'll land on your feet," she said, as if it were mercy. "I never left them," I said. When the door shut behind her and my truck rolled away from that block for the last time, I felt no vertigo. Only clarity. People think divorce is a fall. It's not. It's a sorting. You strip the load, you check the lines, and you move. Back at the office, I wrote a list the way my mother taught me, block letters, 1 action per line. The top of the page read, Nate Cole, Lifelines. Under it, I wrote the names of lenders, brokers, vendors, the staging firm that fronted furniture for his lifestyle showings, the insurance underwriter who hated surprises, the city inspector who preferred clean plans and clean hands. I didn't need to break the law. I only needed to hold up a mirror. Men like Nate detonate themselves when someone turns off the music and counts the chairs. I capped the pen and leaned back, anger coiled and quiet, ready to work. They had taken me for a man who needed to be seen. They would learn I was a man who needed to be obeyed by his own discipline. The fastest way to lose, I wrote at the bottom of the page, is to underestimate a quiet man. Then I underlined it once, steady as a heartbeat. The next morning would be for movement. Tonight was for sharpening. The first move wasn't noise, it was absence. I stopped keeping my name out of the papers. For years I'd ducked interviews, passed speaking slots to junior partners, kept my picture off brochures. Now, when the invitations came, I started saying yes. I spoke on panels, signed contracts in person instead of through proxies, shook hands with men who knew my company's numbers but had never met the man behind them. Then I remodeled the house. Not the old Daly City one. That belonged to Kim now, with its peeling laminate and cozy kitchen she despised. I bought a place on the other side of the city, a clean-lined property with steel beams and glass walls. Not gaudy but visible. Every permit was public record. Every construction dumpster parked out front was a quiet announcement that something was changing. Inside, I let crews work while I moved through my days with precision. My truck stayed the same, my clothes stayed simple, but my presence shifted. When the tech journals profiled rising consulting empires, I didn't decline to comment. When a reporter asked why no one had heard of me 5 years ago, I smiled and said, "That's how you build without distractions." The quote ran with my picture. Whispers spread faster than truth. At industry events, I saw heads tilt when I walked into the room. People began using words like visionary, the kind of fluff I normally ignore. I let it stand, and Kim heard it all secondhand. I know because Madison let it slip one night when she thought I wasn't within earshot. "Did you see that article? Ryan's everywhere now. I thought he was just some back-office consultant. Turns out he's pulling 7 figures on contracts alone." Her voice was laced with disbelief. Kim didn't answer, but I saw her face freeze the way it always did when reality didn't match the story she'd sold herself. I didn't call her, didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence did the work. She'd chosen Nate Cole, a man who played rich in borrowed suits, while I let time expose the difference between flash and foundation. I attended one gala, just one, wearing a tailored navy suit Chloe had recommended before we even dated. I posed for a photo with the mayor and a Fortune 500 CEO. That picture made the rounds. My phone buzzed that night with numbers I hadn't seen in months. Hers was one of them. I didn't answer. The revenge wasn't in cutting Nate down yet. That would come. The revenge was in letting Kim watch, helpless, as the life she'd craved had always been within arm's reach, if she'd valued the man over the marble countertops. I poured myself a whiskey that night, looking out at the skyline, and thought, sometimes silence speaks louder than war drums. And right now, every whisper in San Francisco was saying her name in the same breath as regret. She picked the cafe. Some boutique spots downtown with reclaimed wood tables and baristas who dressed like philosophers. I arrived early, sat with my back to the wall, and ordered plain black coffee. When Kim walked in, I saw the hesitation in her stride, the kind that only comes after months of realizing you bet on the wrong horse. Her hair was styled, but not the way it used to be. Less polish, more effort to look polished. She slid into the chair across from me, eyes scanning my face like she was looking for cracks. "Ryan," she started, voice low. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded and said nothing. She wrapped her hands around her cup like it could keep her steady. "I made a mistake. Nate, he isn't who I thought he was. He's drowning in debt, Ryan. The cars, the penthouse, it's all leveraged. And She trailed off, searching for the right angle. "I miss the stability you gave me. I miss you." I let the silence stretch until it pressed on her like a weight. Then I leaned forward just enough. "Stability, that's what you called small, wasn't it?" Her cheeks flushed. "I didn't mean it like that. I thought I wanted more. But I see now you were more. You've always been more." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You're half right. I am more. But not for you. Her brow furrowed. Ryan, please. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. We can start over. That was when I decided she deserved the truth. I pulled my phone from my pocket, slid it across the table with one of the recent articles pulled up. My face, my name, my company, all right there. Millions every year. Contracts with firms you couldn't pronounce. That's what you walked away from because you were too busy measuring me against rented suits and champagne brunches. Her mouth fell open. Shock, then horror, then the flicker of greedy calculation trying to crawl back into her eyes. You? Why didn't you tell me? Because if money was the only thing keeping you here, I said, you were already gone. Her lip trembled, but her eyes stayed locked on me like I was her last lifeline. Ryan, please, give me another chance. I stood, slid my phone back into my pocket, and laid a $10 bill on the table. You're not my safety net, Kim. You're the storm I already survived. As I turned, I caught sight of him. Nate Cole strolling in, phone to his ear, jacket sharp but eyes sunken. He froze when he saw her, confusion on his face. I didn't wait for the fallout. I walked past him with a nod, calm, steady, leaving Kim pinned between her collapsing fantasy and the truth she could never reclaim. Outside, the air felt clean. Regret might be her currency now, but it had no value with me. The tech conference was supposed to be another routine event. Panels, pitches, and too many men in suits repeating the same buzzwords. I went because presence matters, because letting people see you in person carries weight that no headline can. I didn't expect anything more than handshakes and another round of interviews. Then I met Chloe Adams. She was on stage when I first noticed her, presenting a new cybersecurity framework with the kind of clarity you don't fake. No flash, no theatrics, just precision and confidence. When the panel ended, she didn't linger to collect compliments. She packed up her laptop, answered a few questions with patience, and left like someone with better things to do. That told me more than the slides ever could. We crossed paths at the networking mixer. While others hovered in packs, she stood alone, sipping water, watching the room like she was measuring its integrity. I walked over, introduced myself, and expected the usual reaction. The polite recognition of my name after months in the headlines. But she just smiled, shook my hand, and asked, "So what do you actually do, besides wear a name badge?" I laughed. Not the polite kind, the real kind. I build systems, mostly for people who think they already have it figured out. Then we're in the same business, she said. We talked for an hour. About code, about problem solving, about the difference between work that makes money and work that makes meaning. Not once did she ask what I drove or where I lived. She didn't measure me against Nate Cole's or David Anderson's. She measured me against myself. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I passed. Over the next few weeks, we met again. Lunch, coffee, long walks after events. I kept waiting for the moment when she'd angle for the lifestyle, the quiet questions about accounts, houses, the kind of signals Kim had dropped early and often. But Chloe never did. When she finally asked why I lived so modestly despite the money, I told her everything. Boise, my mother, Kim, the divorce, the silence I'd weaponized instead of rage. She didn't flinch. She didn't pity me. She just nodded and said, "Makes sense. Money buys comfort. But comfort without purpose gets boring fast." That line stuck. It was exactly what I'd been waiting to hear. Not because it excused me, but because it confirmed her values. We built something real, slowly, deliberately. Trust first, attraction second. A relationship not measured in square footage or logos on handbags, but in shared vision. For the first time, I saw the possibility of a partner who valued the man, not the money. And that was worth more than any contract I'd ever signed. Nate Cole built his empire on speed, borrow here, flip there, dazzle investors with rooftop parties while the loans stacked higher than the champagne glasses. Men like him mistake momentum for stability. And stability was the one thing I understood better than anyone. I didn't need to attack him head-on. I just cut the lifelines. A quiet word with a lender who valued reliable clients over loud ones. A delayed renewal with a staging company that suddenly found themselves overbooked. A property insurance underwriter who decided Nate's projects looked a little too risky. Nothing illegal, nothing loud. Just pressure applied in the right places until the cracks widened on their own. Within 6 months, his glossy veneer started to peel. Deals stalled. Creditors circled. The penthouse that once dripped with champagne flutes became a showroom for unpaid furniture. Kim was right there beside him, clinging to the illusion while the floor gave way beneath her heels. I heard about the unraveling before I saw it. Articles shifting from praise to speculation. A photo of Nate leaving a courthouse, jaw tight, sunglasses hiding eyes that looked more hollow than hungry. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their collapse was the natural gravity of greed. One evening, I spotted Kim in a grocery store. No makeup, hair tied back, wearing a cardigan that looked borrowed. She didn't see me. She was counting coupons, holding her phone to her ear while her face twisted in frustration. I didn't linger. I just pushed my cart past the aisle, steady stride, steady breath. That was enough. A week later, word spread. Nate had filed for bankruptcy protection. Cars repossessed. Investors suing. His network of admirers scattered the moment the free champagne stopped flowing. And Kim, well, Nate blamed her for being bad luck before packing a single suitcase and disappearing to chase the next shiny thing. She ended up in a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a job answering phones at a dentist's office. Madison stopped returning her calls. The brunch crowd had no use for a woman who couldn't split the check. She tried calling me once more, a number I didn't recognize at first. The voicemail was short, her voice stripped of its sharp edges. Ryan, I don't know where else to turn. I blocked the number. I'd given her silence before, but this time it wasn't for revenge. It was for closure. She was part of a past that had already collapsed under its own weight. Every house of cards does. I poured myself a drink that night, looking out over the city, and thought about my mother's lessons. Humility, patience, strength. They'd carried me farther than greed ever could. And watching Kim's world collapse confirmed what I'd always known. Loyalty isn't something you trade when the market shifts. It's the only currency that holds value. And she'd spent hers recklessly. Life with Chloe wasn't loud. It wasn't about headlines or showrooms or who had the bigger stage. It was steady, deliberate, and real, the kind of life you build, not the kind you rent. Together we launched an initiative that blended her software genius with my resources. A platform aimed at helping small businesses secure their data without paying enterprise prices. Purpose layered on top of profit. That's how it should be. Our days found a rhythm. Early mornings with coffee on the balcony. Strategy sessions that bled into laughter. Late nights where code and ideas mixed with quiet conversation. Chloe never asked about bank balances, never measured worth in square footage. She measured it in consistency, in action. And that was a scale I never minded stepping on. Meanwhile, Kim's story drifted back to me in fragments. A foreclosure notice here, a mutual acquaintance mentioning her name with a shake of the head. She'd gone from penthouses to a rundown apartment, from brunches to break rooms. Once, a reporter even called me, fishing for a quote about her fall from grace. I didn't answer. Her life wasn't my headline anymore. One night, as Chloe and I walked back from a small neighborhood restaurant, she asked me if I ever thought about Kim. I paused, considered it honestly, then shook my head. Not really. She made her choice. I made mine. Chloe smiled, slipped her hand into mine, and that was the end of it. Because the truth was, I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd already won. Not by tearing Kim down, not even by watching Nate implode, but by walking forward when they stood still. By building something that lasted while they chased something that couldn't. As I watched Chloe laugh under the glow of a streetlight, I realized my mother had been right all along. Money buys comfort. Character builds a life. And I had both. Kim was just a cautionary tale now, fading into irrelevance. My story wasn't about her anymore. It was about what came after. About new beginnings built on bedrock instead of sand. The past was gone. The future was already in motion. And I wasn't looking back.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.